So again, welcome everyone to today's live webinar on the history of backflow prevention. Sorry. Okay. So here's the agenda for today. So we'll go through a brief introduction of what backflow is. Everybody here, I'm assuming most of you here know what backflow is all about. So we'll just do a brief introduction for those who don't know. We'll then move on to the early plumbing systems, development of modern water distribution systems. We'll then go to the need for backflow prevention. We'll talk about backflow prevention advancements. That's when we'll talk about, the assemblies that everyone's familiar with. We'll then move on to organizations for protecting drinking water. Talk about organizations out there that are, focused or in this field of backflow prevention and cross-country control. And then we'll just end with backflow prevention today. What's going on today? What advancements have we made? I tried to, when putting this together, create a sort of timeline, progressing through the timeline here, starting early and seeing where we're at the point we're at now. So hopefully it makes sense. And I really hope you take at least one or two things you didn't know. There was a couple of things that I discovered as I was doing the research. I was like, oh, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. And I'll talk about some of that stuff when we come across it. So let's get started with a very brief introduction. So we'll first talk about backflow. So what is backflow? Backflow refers to the unwanted reversal of water flow in a plumbing system, which can potentially contaminate the clean water supply with pollutants, chemicals, or other harmful substances. How does backflow occur? Backflow occurs when the normal pressure gradient that keeps the water flowing in one direction is disrupted, causing water to flow in the opposite direction. So pretty straightforward. Why does backflow occur? So backflow can occur for various reasons, such as changes in water pressure, system malfunctions, or cross connections between potable and non-potable water sources. Cross connections are points in the plumbing system where the clean water supply can come in contact with contaminated water, creating a risk of backflow. The types of backflow, there's two types. Everyone here is I'm sure familiar with the two types of backflow here. We have back siphonage. Occurs when the drop in the water pressure in the supply line can cause a vacuum or negative pressure. This vacuum can draw water from a non-potable water source into the potable water supply. And the example we always use is a garden hose submerged in a pool. So you see that in our manual, and you see that in our videos. We have an introduction video that is exactly that. So someone puts a garden hose submerged in a pool, creates a vacuum, pulls that pool water into the water supply. And then here's an illustration showing back siphonage. That same vacuum happening here. And the second type is back pressure. Back pressure occurs when there's a higher pressure in a non-potable system than in a potable water system. And this happens with a heating system or irrigation system. Pressure on the other side pushes back the water. So this can force contaminants or chemicals from the non-potable system back into the clean water supply. And here's an illustration of back pressure. Okay, so that's the brief introduction on backflow. So how does backflow disrupt our everyday life? So how does backflow affect everyone? And it's funny because most people I talk to, when they ask where I work, what I do, I explain to them, and their faces are like, "What are you talking about?" So it's pretty funny. Then I explain to them what's going on, and they're like, "Wow, we had no clue that happened." So here's just a few examples of how backflow can disrupt. So obviously, water is essential for life. So clean drinking water is of the highest importance. For public health, getting enough water every day is essential for your health. Our bodies use water in all their cells, organs, and tissues, and water helps regulate our body's temperature and maintain other bodily functions. For sanitation and hygiene, clean water is necessary for proper sanitation and hygiene practices. Clean water makes it easier to maintain adequate hygiene, reducing the spread of diseases. For agriculture and food safety, clean water is also vital for agricultural production and food security. Irrigation and livestock require an ample water resource. Contaminated water can lead to tainted crops and livestock, affecting the food safety and supply chains. And then for economic development, industries depend heavily on water from various processes, including manufacturing, energy production, and mining. Access to clean water ensures the sustainability of these industries and contributes to the overall economic growth. So these are just a few examples why water is important. And you can see they are. When you start thinking about it, water touches everything. Water is extremely important. So what are the backflow implications? Well, backflow can have a profound health implication as it can introduce harmful substances into the clean water distribution system. So that's the key. So we all need water. And how does backflow, come into play here? And this is how it comes into play. It can create a lot of problems. And as we'll see later, we'll talk about some backflow incidents and the health implications involved. So that's why backflow is something we need to look at and constantly be on the lookout for. So let me start now with we'll talk about how backflow. I'm sorry. So we'll talk about early civilization. Sorry, I got ahead of myself here. I was looking at this slide. So we'll talk about early civilizations and their basic plumbing systems. So how did this all get started? So we talked about how important water is to living. Well, how did we get to the point now where water is everywhere, touches everything? So let's start looking back at just some early civilizations and how they used water. So we'll start with the Egyptians. The Egyptians had a noteworthy plumbing system for their time. So the Egyptian empire, they become empires because they're good at doing things, and here's one of the things they were doing. They did well with. So most of their water came from the Nile River, and the Nile River, for those of you who may not know, is the longest river in the world. It's 4,132 miles. So it's a very long river, and that was their source of water. Aside from the Nile, the Egyptians also used some wells they had for domestic use. And here we can see a map of the Nile River. You can see it here. It starts from the Mediterranean Sea through Egypt and heads south through Africa. So you can see it touches all those other parts of Africa there. And at the very top is Egypt. And that's where Egypt got most of its water from. The Egyptians' water uses included the following here. So for irrigation, Egyptians built canals and irrigation systems to control the flow of water from the Nile, which was essential for agriculture. These irrigation systems allowed them to cultivate crops in the desert environment. They also used it for baths. Some homes had bathing areas, public bathhouses. They also used it for waste disposal. They used underground drains to channel wastewater away from the populated areas. And lastly, they had a lot of public wells and fountains, and it was a way how they provided accessible water for the population. So these are just examples of how water was being used in Egypt back then. We'll move on to the Greeks now. We're moving forward here. Again, they were very noteworthy for their time for what they had available to them. So again, they have access to water. They're making water available. Makes them makes them an empire. It makes them very, can't even think of the word right now, but makes them wow, I'm blanking on the word, but you know what I mean. I hope. So most of the water came from the springs, wells, and rivers around that area. So nothing major like the Nile River, but they had plenty of water sources around them. The Greek water uses included, again, public fountains, because, again, they provided accessible water for the population. So you're starting to see a trend here. Public fountains are a way for people to get water. The more fountains they have, the more water there is. So you'll see that as we go along. Here's the first mention of indoor plumbing for the Greeks. They use clay pipes to bring water into homes from for various uses, such as bathing and cooking. So that was one thing that popped out right away. I was like, oh, they're using clay pipes back then. So they were the first ones, or one of the first ones, to start using clay pipes. And they also used it for toilets. So public restrooms were common. And you'll see later how public those restrooms were. But I also found that very interesting. So here's a photo of the clay pipes in that period, just to show you what they look like.